Thank you, sir. So good afternoon or good morning, everybody. Appreciate everyone taking their time to be here during lunch. I know we all like to eat, and we all have busy schedules, so I really appreciate it. As Chris said, my name is Christian Ball, and I've been working in the endpoint management space for about 15 years. Um, Been improving for close to a year now. And I live and breathe in the device endpoint management space. So all things config manager are now Microsoft Endpoint Manager, and Intune, which is now also Microsoft Endpoint Manager. And so we're going to talk about that really quick when we get started here to explain to you all, in case you haven't caught up with some of the terminology that Microsoft loves to change, how that's kind of becoming one giant platform. So my co-presenter today with me is Griffin Byer. So Griffin, would you like to take a minute and introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Chris. As you stated, yeah, my name is Griffin Byer. I'm a technical director here with improving over the systems management and enterprise mobility space. Here to co-present with Chris and help enlighten you on some of the keys and gotchas and maybe things that you might not have thought of around device trust and how that overlays within a holistic security posture. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, Chris.
Great, thanks, sir. So to get onto our agenda today, before we get started on that, there is some terminology. Microsoft, everyone's heard of, SCCM or Configuration Manager, which is Microsoft's on-premise, device management suite of products, right? And you can make that tool cloud managed or cloud connected, rather. So if you have devices that are in the cloud, you can kind of co-manage those devices as well with Configuration Manager. And on the flip side of that, everyone's heard of Microsoft Intune, and Intune and Configuration Manager are really just the same product now. So they're using Microsoft Endpoint Manager, and so that as the title. So with that, you've got Endpoint Manager that exists in the cloud. So you could have just Microsoft Endpoint Manager living in the Azure space, or you can have what they refer to as a co-managed environment where you're managing both on-prem devices and cloud devices, and it's all connected under one hood. So has anyone ran into some confusion with some of the name changes that they've had over time? I know they'd love to do that from time to time, especially with Windows 10.
Absolutely.
The ever-changing acronym.
Yeah, acronyms are fun, right? So I may, if I bounce back and forth today between MEM or between Intune, just know that I will do my best to make sure we're talking about whether it's cloud or on-prem as we go through this. So now back to our agenda. We've got, we're really going to go through device trust, what it is, how you establish it, where it lives as part of the device management lifecycle and endpoint security, right? We're going to talk about MFA and how MFA plays a part in that. We're also going to talk about Windows Information Protection. This is something that I believe a lot of people don't leverage and may want to consider. It's really application protection policies, but for Windows, where you have MAM. It all falls under MAM, so it's all kind of one big suite. They just use Windows Information Protection to kind of differentiate that from, say, devices like your endpoints, like your phones and things of that nature. So then we're going to talk about enlightened apps, what those are, which is really native trusted apps within Intune or Microsoft Endpoint Manager. From there, we're going to talk about the difference between enrolled and registered devices, and then we're going to finish up with discussions on hybrid Azure AD Join and Autopilot. So, like I said, when we look at this as trusted devices, it's really part of this really a larger picture, or your overall cloud solution. So you want to layer different protections so that dependent on how your users are accessing your organizational data, so the condition of the request for access, right, defines the controls that you create to present a user with access to the information they might be requesting. So for example, maybe they're connecting from a device that's enrolled in Intune, connected to Active Directory, and they're remote, so they're connecting over a VPN connection. You're most likely going to give that device a little more, give the user rather, a little more flexibility in how they interact and move data between applications or from your network to the device. The flip side to that is that you may, if you connect to a device that's not enrolled, but they're using applications from a mobile device to access data, Word, Outlook. A common example I would say would be email, SharePoint Online, Outlook Mobile. In this way, restrictions could be a little more stringent because your organization may not own the device, and once that information leaves your network, loss of control is you've lost control of where it goes. Does anyone have issues with that today, where maybe you've got users that are, hey, I'm connecting my phone to your network and copying data? You think they're copying data to, local resources that you may not have visibility into?
Definitely.
Definitely. How have you handled that in the past? Have you guys just talked to the user, said, hey, please don't do that?
That's generally
Or,
what we've been doing, but we would like to be able to have a little more control over that.
okay. Do you have problems with the flip side, with the reverse of that? So say like a user, hey, I saved my TurboTax returns for the last 5 years onto like a local drive.
Yes, we do.
Yeah. Yeah. I've seen that too. It can be frustrating, and also kind of if a user is looking for their tax returns or you have access to that, that's not necessarily information that even someone in IT should have, or HR or anything, especially if it's personal information. So it definitely is not fun. So when we move on to device trust, we talked about it. It's really two scenarios, right? Devices that your organization owns. So you've purchased them; they've been purchased by your company, enrolled into MEM or Intune, or some other. Maybe you have another MDM solution. Maybe you're using AirWatch or Jamf if you've got just iPhone devices or iDevices. And then there's devices that you don't. You're bringing your own device sort of scenarios, right? A personal iPad or iPhone or Android tablet. Maybe even someone using an unmanaged Windows laptop, right? So you want to focus. So when you see, as we focus on device trust, the other conditions from that previous slide, you start to see this sort of narrow down in this next slide here. So. And you're looking at what type of device they're connecting to, where the user is located. Maybe they're just on their device at home, or maybe you've got network restrictions in place where, hey, so-and-so is traveling to Europe for a week. They want to log into SharePoint, and maybe you take the time to block, say, hey, you know what, if you're coming from outside the US trying to access our corporate network, whether it's email or SharePoint, we're not going to allow that. And then based on how you determine whether you grant or deny access to that data, you're going to want to use things like MFA, right? Because if you don't have anything in place to determine how people are accessing that data, they're just going to get in and they're going to do whatever they want, right? Outlook for the web is something you always see people do. They have Outlook on their mobile device, and they've got attachments, so they're downloading them. But maybe you don't want someone to do that, and there's ways that we can do that with device trust. And you can start with MFA. MFA is always where we want to start when it comes to device trust. And MFA device trust is super important when it comes to remote work, right? It's always, hate to read from the slide itself, but it's always something that a PIN or password, username, whatever, something that you have. A device that says, hey, prompts that person on the other end that says, are you really you? Are you really trying to access this information? And then something that you are, who you are, trust, right? We trust that device. So And with MFA, we can have multiple avenues to verify, who's at the door and who's requesting access to your environment. You can provide options from authentication pins through like Microsoft Authenticator to push notifications or text messages, phone number, or a backup email that the user establishes to get those pins. And that's where you start to build the trust relationship between your data and the network. And the people who are accessing it. So, with everyone on the call, do you all has anyone implemented MFA? Maybe either Microsoft first party or third party MFA?
We have MFA enabled for administrators in our Azure Active Directory environment.
Okay, so we're talking like Intune administrators, global admins, that kind of deal.
Global admins, yes.
Yeah. Okay, and that's always good to do that.
Yep, same here.
What are there things that are preventing you from rolling it out to the users? Is it maybe difficulty with them maybe figuring out how MFA actually works and how to sign in, or is it licensing?
Right now, we're just doing it for the global administrators, and we're looking at rolling it out to end users later, but we're also still getting into Azure and Exchange Online right now.
Okay. All right. Okay.
And Chris, we'll be getting there soon.
Yes, I do. Chris and I were testing it yesterday.
You know what the only problem is that I'd say, you have those good days and bad days with Microsoft, and when it's a bad day, especially on MFA, when all of a sudden, for no unexplainable reason, your admin account is hitting you like 3 times out of the blue. So, I guess there are those little discrepancies. And I know Dave can vouch too, where you can just kind of see when those days are where they're struggling to meet, capacity or something.
Yeah, for example, you'll ask for an MFA prompt, and it'll take 10 minutes to get the text to your mobile device, or longer.
Oh, I see. So it's not so much. It's really that. It's really getting the notification. I have seen in some instances a delay where you don't get the prompt, or you get the prompt and click approve, and it's on you get on your mobile device, you click approve, and then it's like, oh, the screen's still there, and then you look at the app and you go into the app, and then the approval screen is still there. So yeah,
I think part of it are the different options that are available. So for instance, sending a text message with a code that you have to enter versus using the Authenticator app where you get the, approve button. So there's a couple different ways of doing it. And I'd like to know what the lay of the land is as far as what are my different options and which one's the best to force upon a user with the least impedance to their day.
That's a good point. I think that, and Griffin, I'd like you to weigh in here too as well. I think for me, I like to have both the application and then text message. That's kind of my feelings. It's easy to explain how everyone knows how to check a text message. Well, you'd hope. And if they don't have the application, say Johnny gets a new device, and they don't install, their authenticator, or they're not, where they can scan the QR code to set it up. I think, that's where the SMS code as a backup comes in. That's my kind of personal preference.
Yeah, we typically see most customers that we try to work with from an adoption standpoint use the Authenticator app, but have SMS or at least one other as a backup. It just depends on the scenario. We want to be as minimally intrusive to the end user base as possible, especially for those frontline information workers. That's typically what we see in those.
Yep. And some people who switch devices a lot, I'm one of those people where I change my devices out regularly, but that's typically because I'm testing different things. And, with MFA, right, that's why I prefer the SMS passcode to come to my phone. So if I don't have the authenticator piece set up, I can still get a text message to enter a code to move on. So I really think it depends on what your users are comfortable with. Your the way your environment works and how users respond. I think everybody's users are different, and we all know that users are adverse to change, right? They never want, oh, I got to add a new app to my own personal device. Well, or your corporate issued device. Well, yeah, maybe. It depends. You want to work from home? So, because yeah, but MFA helps with keeping people, keeping you safe from attacks. A lot of times, people will get end up with a breach simply because MFA wasn't on.
Yeah, it ties into the larger overarching story. So I think the first in our series was around identity-driven security. So it's, as Chris was showing in the previous slide, all of those signals that come in, MFA starts with helping to block the front door, but device trust can come into play, and what he's going to get into in just a second, of how that can be applied to when the MFA would be applied, depending on what your trust level is.
Yep. All right. Good discussion, guys. All right. So move on here. It's my slide changes. There it is. All right. So when we start with application protection and MEM or Intune, a lot of people, when you think about it, it's really bring your own device is kind of like where I like to start with these discussions. So I want to define first for you all like what an app protection policy is and what they do. And so, at their core, app protection policies are really just rules that ensure your organization data remains contained within that app, and it manages the flow of your data. Okay, and that's built on an application protection policy framework. All right, that framework contains 3 layers. All right, and those layers are, and we'll get into those here in a minute. There's just basic protection, which allows you to ensure that apps might be protected with a PIN or the device is encrypted. Maybe perform some selective wipe operations. So somebody loses their laptop or their iPhone, you can go in and selectively wipe data or wipe that device. Which then that sort of stacks onto enhanced data protection, which is kind of my personal favorite. And that prevents, through enlightened apps, that kind of prevents things like cut, copy, and paste functionality. And you can start specifying things like minimum OS requirements, right? Like you don't want Missy, who's still rocking Windows XP or Windows 7 or whatever it is, trying to connect to your devices, to your network to gain access. Or you don't want them to use if they've got an old iPhone or an old version of Android, which I think I see more often times than not. You don't want them logging in with an OS that doesn't meet that requirement to gain access to your data. And the third one is really, enterprise data protection, which is more enhanced pins, so you can do longer pins, and you've got app threat defense. This is really a level that's used for people who have access to super sensitive data. And then there's some requirements around, app protection policies. If you're using Android devices, for example, you've got to use the Intune company app portal if you want to provide some of the app protection policies. And then if you want to enroll in Intune or some sort of MDM solution or bring your own device, which is totally fine. Is anyone using app protection policies today with any of their with any of their devices for bring your own device or even your organization?
We've got one configured, but we haven't rolled it out yet. It's really only for one user.
Is that a C-level executive by chance?
No, it's not a C-level executive. It's an executive's consultant.
Ah, okay. All right. So, we talk about life without protection, right? Which is kind of the wild, wild west of things. And while this meme kind of sums it up, right? is your data, are you from around these parts? And probably not exactly. Meaning, you don't have a way to restrict the data from intermingling. If you, users can connect to from any device they want to the network, right? And they can move data between, corp and personal locations without restriction. And if they want to send that data to anyone they want or copy that data to a flash drive, they can do so. They want to post company secrets on Twitter or Facebook, yeah, they can do that because you don't have a way to restrict how data moves. If you're looking at the arrows, oops, wrong one. What happens when you move your mouse? So if you're looking at the arrows there on the right, and that kind of indicates where it kind of indicates how your data can travel, right, to the local device storage. You've got corporate and personal data mixed together with no sort of restrictions to prevent you from keeping that happening. So I don't know if anyone's using app restrictions today or app level, if they have unmanaged devices today that they've found shown up on the network. I'm sure you have. I know it's really commonplace in a lot of places. So when we get over here to to mobile device management, right? We've got why is that slide all goofy? Yeah, there we go. That's what I wanted. So when you start layering in application protection, this is where not just in this, like I said, it's not just mobile devices either, right? It's personal devices as well, laptops, personal laptops. So if you look here, these arrows kind of indicate what happens when you start to lay down some of these app protection policies, right? You've got, trusted applications or enlightened applications, they call them, like Outlook or Excel or Word, and you're allowed to copy and paste and move data between those apps, but you can't save them to personal storage. You can't you can't copy and paste it to a personal application. That is where some of the app protection policies and Windows information protection sort of come into play. They prevent you from moving those data to locations that are untrusted. Let's see. Some of the other things that you can do with this, if you have, say, on mobile devices, for example, if you've got links, we always have links within Outlook, right? So someone's clicking on a link, maybe that's to go to a web browser, they send them a link to a file or whatever. You can force that device to open up with an enlightened browser, a browser that you choose, like Microsoft Edge, or you can just block that behavior from unmanaged devices completely and just say, hey, you know what? I'm gonna let you open anything. You're allowed to log in here, but this is a link to, say, a SharePoint site. So yeah, that'd be a no. We're not gonna let you move that data or connect to a different untrusted location.
Do you define the personal applications or personal storage in a whitelist or a blacklist somewhere, or is that something that's taken care of in the mobility management suite?
Yeah, within Intune, you can have exceptions on where things are stored. So as a part of the app protection policy, so we're assuming in this scenario, this is on an untrusted device where you're containerizing your corporate application data. You can say where that data can actually be stored and make some exceptions. So it's more of a containerization with exceptions outside of that. I don't know if that makes sense or not. It's not a total whitelist or blacklist. You're saying these set of applications can work within this container. These are tied to our identity, our company's data, and this is where this can be saved. So you have a couple of different options there.
That makes sense.
So that kind of takes us over to Windows information protection. I really think it's an amazing tool that organizations should leverage. You look at this graphic here, it kind of shows you where Windows information protection lives, and it's really it lives between data leaks and data protection. So with Windows information protection, it prevents you from allowing that data on a Windows device to go to an untrusted or unmanaged location. The basic way Windows information protection works is it adds like a tag to your org data and to say, hey, it's a network boundary, or it adds tags that says, hey, this is corporate data. And when that data is saved from sources like SharePoint to a device, you can set it up so it's automatically encrypted using encrypted file system. And if you use Windows information protection without enrollment, you can still identify which apps are allowed to access corporate data and whether or not users can copy those files to a personal file location. Has anyone used or heard of Windows information protection today or have it implemented? So one thing that Windows information protection does is it enables you to perform like a selective wipe of data, right? So you can, that way grandma's photos, if they're saved somewhere or mixed in on a device, you can prevent wiping out personal data, right? So because of those tags and things that are attached to the files when they're downloaded to a device, you're able to selectively wipe that information or that data depending on the device. So some notes about Windows information protection from a requirement standpoint. You need, and Griffin or Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, you need an E3 license or an Azure AD Premium and an Intune license for it to be able to use Windows information protection. And if you've got Windows 10 Windows 10 home systems, which I don't know why you would, it does support Windows information protection for mobile app scopes only. Windows information protection does not support multi-identity, so it's one identity per device. And it will protect org data locally on removable storage as well. So when we get to MDM and we start talking about the physical mobile device management, it can be broken down really as far as a life cycle goes into 4 distinct phases. You've got to enroll, provision, manage, and protect, which is technically, I know it makes it 5, but manage and protect kind of fall under the same part of the life cycle, and then retire. So when you enroll devices into MEM, you do a few things, right? You can provide a self-service portal where users can enroll the devices or gain access to applications. So if the device is enrolled, you can push applications from Intune directly to whatever that device is. And that saves you time. So you can also deliver custom terms and conditions to the end user so they can agree to your terms and conditions before they start using the device. If you're provisioning Apple devices, you can perform, bulk enrollment using the Apple configurator. And when you go back to application protection policies, on enrolled devices, maybe you want app protection policies to be a little less stringent on enrolled devices because you trust that device. You have a little more control on those devices. And then when it comes to provisioning, with Intune, Intune or MEM, you can push things like certificates, email configurations, VPN, Wi-Fi profiles for your on-prem network if we ever go back to the office. You can install mandatory apps automatically or restrict apps that they can install on corporate devices, which is also kind of nice. Anyone doing that kind of stuff today with Intune or MEM or maybe a third-party company like AirWatch or? So when it gets to manage and protect, you can kind of protect your device and data by restricting access if the user's got a jailbroken device or rooted device. On Windows, maybe it's just as simple as that OS not meeting that requirement. You can also do reporting in Endpoint Manager on device compliance and say, hey, you know what? If it's not compliant, no access is allowed. And then you can also retire devices and allow you to revoke access to org data and start working on that selective wipe. Or you can also audit, and you can audit like lost or stolen devices. Someone says, hey, this is missing. You're able to do some auditing on that and figure out what's going on with it. When we talk about MDM, MDM management and application and then compliance, when you're enrolled, and you can see with the graphic to the left here, what data looks like on a complete managed device. The arrows show where your data can travel, and further to that, your MDM policies apply, which really, they allow you to lock down the device and protect your corporate information. Layering MDM on top of MAM and using tools with things like compliance policies, they help with a few basic things, right? They define the rules that the device needs to meet to be compliant or to be trusted, and that it allows you to create an action that occurs when a device is non-compliant. For example, if the device is non-compliant, you can choose to say, hey, maybe I'm going to allow you access to that data, but you can't save it. Or maybe I'm just going to deny your access entirely. Did that again. Sorry, I think I know how to use PowerPoint by now. So when you talk about compliance policies, they're configured in really two methods within MEM or Intune. There's the compliance policy settings. So these are tenant-wide, right? Apply to your whole tenant, and these settings that every device receives. So look at this as like a baseline setting for how your policies would work. And has the device ever received any policies, and is it truly compliant or is it not compliant? And then you have the actual device compliance policy, and these are more targeted to the platform. So Android, Windows, iOS, whatever it is, and deployed to specific groups, users, or devices. And that's where you can, we all have C-level people that we work with, right? And the C-level guys are always like, I don't want to enter pins. I don't want to reset my password. I just want to do things. And so maybe you give them that access, but say, hey, you know what? If you want to do that, that's okay, but you just can't save this data somewhere. And that's where device compliance policies come into play. Along with, you can use compliance policies to say, hey, if this person's connecting and doesn't meet the minimum OS requirements or requires encryption. A lot of people set their iPhones up still today with no PIN, right? So there's no PIN, you get no access. And once they set the PIN, it meets that requirement, becomes compliant, and they can access the information they want. So when we talk about enlightened apps and unenlightened apps, they're really able to take the policies that you configure and restrict or prevent that data from doing certain things. So today, enlightened, there's around 45 applications, I believe, give or take, that are considered enlightened, right? Everything else would be unenlightened. So an example of an enlightened app is probably stuff you're all familiar with, my Office 365 stack, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, OneDrive, other apps that are not from the Microsoft stack, like if you're using Zoom for video conferencing, or some stuff. I think SAP Fiori is another enlightened app, right? Box is an app. Adobe Acrobat is considered an enlightened app, right? And enlightened apps really just mean that they are apps that are aware of your app protection policies and your WIP policies, so they can trust each other. And enlightened and the applications, because of those policies, know that difference between your org data and personal data, based on the use of the tag from the compliance settings. So I would imagine the natural question then, becomes, why can't Intune or MEM, protect my must-have business critical app, right? Like maybe you're a Mass 90 user, or you've got an application that is that is developed or that you use that's not listed. And that's a fair question. In order for Intune to be able to protect an app, it needs to be enlightened, and enlightened is just the phrase used to define that app that wrapped to support a corporate identity that's managed by Intune. So this is the trade-off Intune App Protector kind of makes. We want to be able to protect corporate data for any user, no matter where they access the data. So it doesn't matter where they're coming from. We want to be able to protect it. For this to work, the applications need to be built to understand identities that are associated with Intune or MEM, right? Other mobile device platforms make the opposite trade-off, where they give you a container that has all your corporate applications, and the container can have a number of restrictions applied to it that makes it, feel secure. But the end user, they unfortunately have to change the way they work, and then that can be frustrating to them. They just kind of want to open Word and look at my documents and maybe save files to Outlook, right? They don't want to have to jump through a bunch of extra hoops in order to make it work. So it really depends on your users and how what trade-offs they want to make. We don't want them to jump through a lot of hoops to access corporate information, because users get disgruntled. They find workarounds when that happens. You guys find that people are that users find workarounds all the time to get around some of the policies and things you put in place because they just simply don't want to comply, or they think it's a hassle.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge was when we had to put Edge on all the devices because the Intune browser went away.
Oh,
Yeah.
People were ticked
It
about
was
that.
replaced by Edge. Yeah. They thought it was too complicated to have two enlightened browsers.
I wouldn't be
The one-
surprised if they start to add with the partnership that Microsoft's kind of curating with Google, that Chrome eventually becomes an enlightened app. I wouldn't be surprised if that happens.
Good, because you can
Yeah,
push
the-
Edge to them, but they still want to use Chrome.
Right. So the one thing that Microsoft continuously works with their partners to make more and more enlightened apps, and really that just means that SDK is applied so that you can have that app layer security. One thing to add though, Chris, for like line of business applications, you can apply that SDK for something that's internally developed to make that enlightened to provide out to your can be part of that containerization, whether that's on a corporate or a personal device. Just one thing to add.
Right.
That's a cool feature.
Yep. That's a good point. Intune SDK all the way for those apps, for sure. So next we're going to get into our probably some of our favorite topics, which is registered and enrolled devices, right? So of course, on this slide, half of my stuff is not showing up for that. So let me go fix that right quick. You can see what I'm looking at. All right, there we go. Me being picky. And of course, it starts back at the beginning. So. Let's do it here, I don't care. Sorry about that, everybody. So you can kind of see it a little bit here. When we talk about one of the questions I get, are what are registered and what are enrolled devices, right? What does it mean? And registered is really simply that. It's just a device. It's known to Intune or Azure AD, but you aren't doing anything to it, to the device itself. The account that the person is logging in as is most likely a user account local to the device. So then in the case of Windows, you're signed in through the apps, but your device isn't enrolled, so it doesn't show up under an account as a registered device. So an example of that, if you're here, my account, my own personal laptop for improving, I'm logged in as an account, a local account called I just call it work, right? That's what I do. And then under your school, under settings, if you look, you can see like access to work or school, and then that's really it's just I'm logged into some apps as me for the purposes of doing work. And then when you look at on the flip side to that, if your device is enrolled, maybe it's enrolled in just Azure Active Directory, maybe it's enrolled as a hybrid Azure AD join type of device, then here you're going to see kind of when you look at that, look at your devices, you can see it's you're logged in as your device. It's Azure Active Directory join. You can see if there's BitLocker keys for it or whatever. So there's definitely a difference between those. So if you have a device that's enrolled in Intune and joined to Azure AD or hybrid Azure AD, it shows up as the device you're logging in. It shows up as the device you log in as. So the account that you log in is, it's part of your Active Directory domain or your Azure AD domain if you're just using Azure. Your policies would apply then for Windows information protection, and all of your conditional access policies and compliance policies you define would be applied when it's in that state, right? And so that kind of takes us to where our devices live. So where your devices exist on your cloud journey really depends on what your requirements are. That most likely determine how you approach your device trust strategy. Those factors could be something like, who owns that data? Is it your organization or is it the user? Is it personal or is it, is the personal and org data mixed? Who gets to manage the device, right? Is it enrolled or, are you just handling how data flows? And what ID you want to use to authenticate, a local account or your name at your org.com, right? Which really leaves us with the three basic scenarios. Hybrid Azure AD join, which by extension is joined to your on-prem Active Directory. Azure AD join, which is just simply in the cloud, or Azure AD or Intune registered, right? Hybrid Azure AD, you're going to use that for devices that are corporate owned and managed devices, right? Authenticating the user with a corporate user ID that exists both local AD and in Azure AD. And authentication can be done both on-prem and off-prem with Azure AD. Azure AD joined only devices, that's for corporate, again, that's for corporate owned and managed devices. Authenticating using a corporate ID that exists only in Azure. And then the device that's maybe Azure AD registered, kind of like where your mobile devices live in this workplace join scenario over here to the right. It's really the local ID or personal cloud ID and authentication to corporate resources through the applications, right? But that's kind of where it depends on where your device lives. I know some of you on the call are using Azure AD Join. Are some of you doing hybrid already, or are you just doing domain joined or just Azure? Just curious where everybody else is kind of at in this sort of life cycle here.
Right now, all of our devices are just in the domain at this point. Again, we're still implementing Azure and Intune and everything.
So when you say in the domain, you mean on-prem Active Directory, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so one way to think of it is registered is more so like it's a personally owned device, but it's corporate enabled. So you can authenticate, like I said, with your local ID, but you can still use your corporate credentials to get to your Azure Active Directory to get to Outlook.com or what have you. where they're MDM type managed. Azure AD join gives you some additional trust. It can give you access in a little more streamlined capacity, but it's still strictly cloud-based. All of authentication will go strictly through Azure AD. Hybrid Azure AD join is where you can traverse between local on-premise applications, use a pass-through and OAuth and SAML that can give you access to on-premises resources, traversing through. So it's just different levels of trust, and then domain joined is kind of that steady state, their legacy state.
Right.
4 different areas of device trust.
Mm-hmm. We talk about, kind of how, hybrid Azure AD join sort of works, right? The device behaves just like any other device, any other Active Directory join computer, right? You need to sign in with an Active Directory account. User credentials are, validated against an Active Directory domain controller. And then if you're using group policy, which come from your domain controller, those are applied to the devices. And it all makes sense because the device it is an Active Directory join computer. By extension, when you look at, a hybrid Azure AD join device, it lives both on-prem, the device object itself lives, on your network and is synced to, Azure Active Directory using your Azure AD Connect tool. I still refer to this as a DirSync server because I'm old school and I remember it as DirSync, and when they start using ADCC or however they change the acronym, it just, the personal opinion drives me crazy. So what this does when this tool is installed in your network, creates a service connection point. So your devices know what Azure AD tenant they are to be a part of. So when you have devices that join to the domain, they see that information on your Active Directory domain controllers, and they know what tenant they're supposed to be a part of, and all that information gets written to the device. Management can still occur through your on-premise tools, whatever those are, or Intune. You can still manage BitLocker if you use an MBAM, or you can move BitLocker to Azure AD if you'd like. I personally prefer Azure AD because, MBAM's going away here in a few years. I think it's scheduled to be retired back in 2024, but also, why have an extra piece of hardware on-prem if you can just manage it all from Azure AD and you're licensed for that? It just makes sense. Is anyone using hybrid Azure ADs today? I know, Danilo, I know we're working on that with you. I just wonder if anyone else is using hybrid Azure AD join. Okay, so we got about 11 minutes here. So, all right, so one of the ways that you can start to build on that hybrid Azure AD join lifestyle, I like to call it, is using Autopilot, and it also kind of helps. Autopilot's a fantastic tool. It really moves you more to a modern provisioning style deployment of Windows, and less build an image, deploy the image with in sysprep if you're still doing that today, or using things like MDT to do your imaging, or maybe you're still using Config Manager. Autopilot is a really simple solution that can be your start of your device trust, right? The way it kind of works is you start out with the hardware information. You get that information from either your existing devices or new devices that you get from your vendor, and they will take that information, upload it to Azure, and now that's kind of registered to your cloud tenant. So from there, you build something called a configuration profile, and that profile kind of tells the device what to do. Do I join Azure only? Do I both join Azure AD and on-prem for hybrid Azure AD join, right? From there, the delivery method, once all that's done, you ship it to the user gets it, and all these things sort of happen in the background. But with your configuration profile, you've got you've also got a domain join profile, and that kind of tells Active Directory where to put that computer object, on your on-prem environment. And then you've got an on-prem connector that will pull Azure AD for devices. Then from there, you kind of have a connection, like an ish connection, I guess you'd say, to Active Directory for if the device is offline, either through always on VPN or on-prem corporate network when you go through the autopilot process. That experience the end user sees is pretty similar to any new computer they would purchase from Best Buy, or if Circuit City was still around, buying it from there, wherever. And they log in. Now, you can even require MFA during the autopilot process in the event that someone's somehow intercepted a device or got a hold of a device that is net new for a user, but they have their information, and you can set up MFA to prompt that user during the autopilot process to verify that the person's actually going to be able to get who they say they are, and how they're going to get access to their device and to your network. Danelle, I know you're working on some autopilot stuff. Is anyone else using autopilot today?
I will vouch. It's cool stuff.
Yeah, I know how much of a fan you are of White Glove.
Ugh, don't go there. So yes, there are some features that Microsoft thought would be cool and then only went like 10% on and then just abandoned, but left there and didn't tell anyone.
All right. So when we talk about what the hybrid Azure AD join process looks like through autopilot, you've kind of got these are kind of your main items here, right? You got your Active Directory domain controller on your corporate network, Intune, and then your autopilot deployment service, which kind of that lives in the cloud, right? And so the employee unboxes their machine, opens it up, logs in. In the background, when that occurs, there are additional steps that run asynchronously to kind of get the device registered to Azure AD, in addition to put it on Active Directory on-prem if that person is completely offline, right? Once that device is registered in Azure AD, then subsequent user sign-ins, they get an additional benefit. Not only do they get the Kerberos ticket from Active Directory to authenticate to your AD on-prem resources, but they can use an Azure AD user token that can allow them access to other resources like Teams or Office 365, whatever it is. And you can do that whether it's on network or off network. When you're doing it off network, there are some sort of additional steps that need to take place in order to get that going. But it certainly can be done, especially in today's world. I know that a lot of us are struggling with shipping devices out and getting them to people. Things are crazy in this COVID-19 world where everybody was just sort of forced into remote work. So how's everybody dealing with some of that today? This is kind of our last slide, second to last slide. So just curious how everybody's dealing with some of these things today. You guys struggling with it at all, or kind of your users just kind of take it for what it is?
Everything seems to be working fairly well for us at this point. We had a mass deployment of mobile devices initially, but after that, we get everything ironed out, and it seems to be working quite well right now.
What about on the Windows side? Did you have mostly a laptop fleet that the users took home and just connect over VPN?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. It's good when you have that already in place, right? Because it's really tough to kind of hurry up and get everyone onto one of those solutions if you don't have it available to you. It makes things really sort of difficult. So once like I said, once all that completes, really this connector is what does a lot of the heavy lifting once you're for offline. Right? There is a connector that gets installed on-prem and that kind of does a lot of the work to get the device from Intune to Active Directory, and then finish completing your domain join process. So once that happens in the background, that user is going to log in, and they're going to reboot their machine, log back in as them, and they'll have all of their on-prem access. But when you're doing it offline, these things sort of take a little bit of time in the background. There is a delay with that, but it certainly can be done. So, all right, and with that,
You had a question. You had a question that came through on the chat.
Did I? Because I have not seen chat.
I think it was Hybrid Azure AD.
So it happens when you hide it, when you're getting all this stuff out of your way, so you can look at, you can see things.
So Christian, the question is around how do we achieve hybrid Azure AD join when off network? And I'm more than willing to jump on that if you want me to.
Well, I think, yeah, why don't you go ahead and run with that one, Chris? Because there's a lot of moving parts when it comes to that process.
Yeah, so hybrid Azure AD join is fully dependent on direct domain connectivity. So especially now that we're in a remote work environment with the pandemic and everything going on, most people aren't constantly connected to the corporate network, or at least they're not in the office, right? So for that hybrid Azure AD join process to occur, we can leverage VPN connectivity. But the challenge is Windows has it baked in that it attempts to do the hybrid Azure AD join process at first user login. And if it can't talk to the domain at the time of user login, it just says, all right, I failed. I'm going to try the next time someone logs in. Problem with that is if you're never on the domain or never on the corporate network, you're never going to be able to talk to a domain controller at user login. And now you can't fully successfully hybrid Azure AD join. So Microsoft does have some guidance around that, but it's fully dependent on the use of what we refer to as an always-on VPN, meaning your VPN connection is established prior to anyone logging into your machine. It establishes that computer boot up, essentially. So like Microsoft's Direct Access would be an example of that. But not everyone has that capability. So something that we've developed as we've seen this become a more challenging issue for organizations is, I don't want to say it's a way to trick the hybrid Azure AD join, but it's really a way to trick the hybrid Azure AD join process. So I can dive a lot deeper into it if people want more details on it, but essentially what we do is we rely on user connectivity to the VPN, and we mimic the Windows integrated process to do the hybrid Azure AD join activities. And it's not as quick or what I would refer to as real time as the baked in process within Windows, but we can achieve hybrid Azure AD join status even if we don't have an always on VPN. It just takes a little bit more step through with VPN connectivity. So the user logs in, they establish their VPN. We leverage some group policy to push some stuff out to the machine that automatically tells it to do some stuff. That stuff happens. And then it requires a prolonged period of VPN connectivity for some synchronization to occur, but then the hybrid process does eventually complete. Maybe it's within the same day, maybe it has to occur the next time the user logs in and connects to the VPN. So it's not, as I said, it's not as real time, but we have a way to get around the always on VPN or the need to be in the office to do hybrid Azure AD join. So if people want more details on that, let me know. We can dive deeper into that. Was there anything else that you wanted to cover real quick? I know we're at our time, Christian. Otherwise, I'll do a quick wrap up. Right. So our next event coming up, I can't believe it's already going to be October, but our next event is in October 13th, monitoring and managing access. And our Rick Streckel here at Improving will be presenting on that topic. How do we identify what's going on in your environment and be aware of any access that is occurring that shouldn't be there. So hope to see everyone there on that event. If you wouldn't mind, I will be sending out a feedback survey. Please take a few minutes to answer some of the questions and submit that. Our goal is to make sure that these webinar sessions provide you as much value as possible. So especially with our upcoming webinars, if there's specific topics, specific features that you want to make sure are included, that's a great way to raise those flags to let us know, hey, make sure we cover X, Y, and Z, and then we can definitely do that in our upcoming sessions. So expect to see that in your email here in the next hour or so, but I appreciate everyone jumping on. Christian, thank you so much. Griffin, thank you so much for your presentation today. And if there's no other questions, we'll go ahead and wrap up. But I think some of us on the improvement side will stick around for a few more minutes in case there are any questions. But again, thanks for joining.